Board members, Commissioner Weaver, and staff, thank you all for joining us. As Ms. Herbert explained, we are going to be having a work session this evening to talk about fiscal year 2023 operating budget. So we're in that process where we're looking ahead to next year. And tonight, we're going to provide a broader overview of local revenue. And we're so fortunate to have the collaborative efforts with our county government and the 5-year plan that we've put together. And that's very helpful for us as we talk this evening. You'll see there's a lot of unknowns in our budget, particularly from the state. And so state revenue is always a question mark for us. But we'll look at our preliminary expenditures and other considerations, have some opportunity for conversation, questions, and feedback along the way. So with that, we'll turn it over. And this is the first, Mr. Hartlove will go over this in the end, but this is really the first sort of conversation, iteration around the budget. There'll be several steps along the way, which Chris will highlight here for you as we go. So Mr. Hartlove.
Thank you. Good evening, board members, Commissioner Weaver. As Superintendent Lockhart said in his introduction, the theme of this presentation is going to be more of what we don't know versus what we know. This is typically early in the process anyway. This is the first official discussion we have of the upcoming year's budget. So we always tend to have the concern of not having all the information, but this year with the significant change to the state funding formula, we have less information than what we normally do. So with that, I will just jump right in. We'll start with state revenue. And as I said, there have been fairly significant changes to the state funding formula that's been in place for 20 years, and so this is a new formula. There are significant changes, and this being the first year, trying to really get a handle on exactly what that means for our revenue has been challenging. We have very limited guidance at this point. So what we've done is we've looked at the guidance that we've had, that we do have, and we back in, I guess, August, September timeframe, there was a DLS analysis that came out that was fairly specific in where we would stand, but again, very, very early. And that analysis had us at an additional revenue amount of $6.6 million. So, we can talk about, glass half full or glass half empty. This is more revenue, additional revenue than we've received in probably over 10 years. Back in maybe 2010, 2009, when we had an increase like that. So that's that's good news. It's not as much as maybe some of the preliminary numbers we were looking at, and that's kind of the glass half empty view of it. So right now, I think, we're happy with this, with the revenue dollars that are coming in, and we'll hope that this is a conservative, we believe this is a conservative number, and hopefully the number will actually, when we see it in January, will be better than this.
And I'll also add, if I can, there's some unknowns about what exactly some of the blueprint requirements exactly are for the coming year. And so we're still trying to figure that out too. And so while I was really pleased, I wish it were more, to see that it's certainly an increase over what we've previously received. We also know that there are requirements of us from the blueprint that we're obligated to use these funds for. So we'll start to touch on that a little bit, but we still don't have all those answers yet either.
That is true. That is true. So go ahead.
And along with that, so we're seeing this potential money. The next page, you're going to talk about Commissioner Weaver's money. They've been assured throughout Kerwin's development that Carroll County would have to contribute zero more. But we don't know the requirements. We do know this money. We have no guarantees that we're going to be fully funded from the state for all the requirements we're going to be given, correct?
That is correct. And the way funding for education has worked in Maryland and will continue to work under this formula is that funding education is it's a shared responsibility between the local and the state, and it's wealth adjusted, so the wealthier jurisdictions get less from the state, and the poorer jurisdictions on a per-student basis get more from the state. So that is the case, and Mr. O'Neill could probably elaborate on this a little bit more, but the assumptions, and they're very early assumptions, but the assumptions that we've seen in all of the analysis is that the county government would not be required to give anything over and above what is in the kind of the history, the plan going forward. So if the funding continues at that level, it doesn't look like from any of the analysis that we've seen that you would have to be required to put in any additional dollars. I don't know if I got that correct, John, or is it? So with that, we will talk, that's a good segue, to the county operating plan amount. That we pulled that right out of the county's plan. We're looking at ongoing revenue here. There was actually last year was an additional $1 million in one-time money. This is in ongoing revenue we're receiving in the plan. It's a $6.4 million increase over the current year. So that's the revenue side, and we'll summarize that in a moment. But this is, we'll talk a little bit about the expenditure side. So I believe at last month's board meeting, Mr. O'Neill went through a presentation on bus contractors and some of the challenges we're seeing there. So the budget, this version of the budget, we're looking at including the items that were detailed in Mr. O'Neill's presentation. It's a $2.2 million increase over FY22. Now, not all of those, some of those items we would have incurred anyway, just in the normal operations of having bus contractors, but the additional amounts were for contracted guaranteed minimums, salary increases, and then basically more of a generic formula increase for bus repayment and depreciation. So I believe at this point, and Ms. Herbert.
Mr. O'Neill, would you tell everyone how much a 3% minimum guaranteed salary increase is? How many cents is that?
Sure, and I did bring an extra handout if you want that for your discussion here, and partly because in addition to the things that Dr. Lockhart indicated he would build into the budget, the contractors are still requesting some other things as well.
They have three things they want to, yes.
So maybe the handout would help. Every 1% increase to the salary portion of the formula would cost the Board of Ed $97,000. And a 3% increase would be, what was it, Mike, in terms of a?
Was it 39 cents?
60
cents.
60 cents on the pay that, gets passed through to the drivers and the assistants. So do you want, is it okay to give you, I can give you the handout, tell you what it is, and if you want to
Yes,
discuss
please
it,
do,
you
because
can.
that is definitely, we're not going to keep bus drivers at 60-cent raise. So, and I understand they are contractors, but they need to be paid. And I saw the other day, and of course the bus driver sent me, that Washington County's paying $25 an hour now, and they've got big billboards up there. So we're going to have to do something to get them. And I do know personally, some of these bus drivers have not ordered their buses either for next year, and that's a biggie. So we need to definitely step up this. I don't know where the money's going to come from, but we need bus drivers to get the students to school and from.
So what we've tried to do with this handout, and it's one page, but it is a front and a back, is try to, I worked with Chris or Mr. Hartlove and Mr. Hardesty today to try to put in one place all of the different changes or increases we've either been talking about or have brought to you for action. So the first part of the first section of the handout, where there's the first table, those are itemized all of the changes that were mutually agreed to in the reimbursement formula report that we brought to you, I think, in August. And at that time, Dr. Lockhart indicated he would incorporate these changes into the operating budget. Now, there are some variables that underlie different parts of the formula that became known subsequent to that August presentation, and once those variables were known, we adjusted the numbers accordingly. So, for instance, the price of a new bus, both a regular education bus and a special education bus, once those are known, then that becomes part of the PVA. Those came in. We based the maintenance rate on the regional CPI for mass or large-scale transportation maintenance. That rate came in, and it was about double what the rate had been on average for the last 5 years in terms of an increase, so that's incorporated. And then we pay fuel directly based on an every 2-week adjustment of actual diesel rates of a survey of area filling stations that we do. And so that wasn't really something in the committee report, but that also drives the budget. And so looking at where the diesel cost is and has been for a while, neither Mr. Hardesty nor Mr. Hartlove nor I were comfortable budgeting it at $3 per gallon again, so we made a decision to budget for $3.50 per gallon. And there are some others, but those are the big ones. So all totaled, those changes with those known variables take that increase over what it would have been in a normal year. I think back in August I suggested an estimate of 1.5 million. That brings just those changes up to 1.9 million, which is the biggest change to get that entire category to the $2.2 million increase overall that Chris has been showing on the screen. So that's the first section. Those are the mutually agreed to parts of the report that Dr. Lockhart indicated he would bring to you in his proposed budget. The next section, the smaller table with 3 rows, these are the items that the contractors have been reaching out to you, indicating that when they shared the report with all of the contractors, the contractors as a whole asked for these 3 additional things. And here's what those 3 things are, and our best estimate as to what that would mean for the FY23 operating budget. They would like us to reduce the fuel divisor from 7 miles per gallon to 6.5 miles per gallon. We estimate that would cost $171,000. They would like a second administrative allotment, and I know that in different conversations I might have had with some of you, at one time I had a much smaller number for that. That reflected my misunderstanding of what they were actually asking for. I thought they were asking for the amount that we increased the administrative allotment above in the total recommendations, that increase be given twice a year. They clarified that they're actually asking for the entire administrative allotment twice a year, at the start of the year and then again at mid-year. So that changes that estimate to a little over $500,000. And then Mrs. Herbert already asked what's a benchmark for a salary increase. Every 1% costs $97,000, and what we proposed in the report was a minimum guarantee of 3%. So they're obviously asking for more than that. We haven't really had a chance. I've had some issues in my personal life. As some of you might know, I haven't had a chance to really have any more meetings with them. Clearly, they're asking for more. What more would be, I don't have a definition yet. And to be blunt, from my perspective as an employee here, I don't have any parameters for what for what would be considered or agreeable either. So maybe that's an area for conversation. I think it was at the last meeting where you approved the driver and assistant recognition bonuses. That's the section at the bottom of the page. We ended up dispersing the bonuses to 319 drivers and 88 assistants, bus assistants, and you can see what those costs were broken out that way. And then on the reverse, we tried to, at different times during this conversation or maybe in offline conversations, some of you have asked me for different numbers or to verify things that have happened over the last couple of years, particularly relative to the pandemic. So we tried to go ahead and break some of those figures out for you as well. And what these things represent is the first year of the pandemic, when the state superintendent closed schools, I think the middle of March that year for the rest of the year. So essentially a quarter, more or less, of a school year. We did hold the contractors harmless for that time period, and so they received the full disbursement from that category of the budget, except for fuel for routes that, that didn't get driven on a given day. The second area, again, that's for the last school year, the prior school year, the full year of operation under the pandemic. Again, we did our best to try to hold them harmless after some discussion. For that year, there were, if you remember, we were closed for physical attendance and then briefly open and then closed again, and then we had pods and we had the Wednesdays the whole year where we weren't in person. But what we tried to do was we ultimately decided to go back to the spring routes, the year before routes, and pay them whole for those routes unless the actual manifest for a route that year, last year, was more than that, and then we paid them for what they actually drove. But in essence, we tried to hold them harmless, except for fuel for routes that, weren't driven. We also tried to come up with a fair way to reimburse them for the athletic seasons that didn't exist because they're holding those buses for that purpose. So we tried to reach something that made sense there and paid for the spring and then for the full athletics the next year, spring of '20 and the full athletic seasons the next school year. And then we reached some agreements for summer recovery this summer and for fall ELO, which just wrapped up, and we'll be looking at the same thing for the spring as well. And in those cases, we pay them a higher premium for drivers and assistants, and then kind of like I call it a bus fee here, but it was sort of like an administrative allotment just for that program. So for the summer, it was $500 per bus. They asked that it be increased for fall ELO, and we increased that to $750 per bus. So that's my best attempt to try to get all of the numbers in one place to help you have the conversation. President Herbert?
Now, I know your meeting was canceled today, so when are you going to have your next meeting? That way you can get an idea of what they want. I know we don't have $25 an hour in our budget. I know that.
Right.
But I know we've got to come to a number. So do you have another meeting set up with them yet?
I don't think we do. I
Mike,
canceled
do you?
today.
We're going to set up, but it's not set up yet.
Okay.
We'll reach back out this week now that I'm back and get one on the books. I don't know what day
Yeah,
it'll be.
because
but
yes. Okay.
We'll do that. But
I know they're very appreciative of this and all this, but I'm telling you, with the fuel, well, they get the fuel, but it's just bad all over, and I know what's happened in all the other counties around us, and when you put a billboard up for $25 an hour, that really hurts us. And I know we don't have that money, but they need more than 60 cents, an hour increase. So,
Is there any federal or state grants that we can tap into, especially since the federal government has, with the mask mandates, any public transportation you have to wear a mask on? So since our buses are considered public transportation under that, is there any type of grants or funding that we can tap into to help with any of this?
Well, to close out the first year of the pandemic, we did use federal funds, I believe. I know we did for summer recovery and for ELO and also for spring ELO beyond. So the numbers you see on the reverse relative to summer recovery and ELO, those are
Right.
Are they completely being funded by?
I believe so. Yes, the dollars that are tied to the summer recovery and the fall ELO are all covered by federal dollars. But we have not received any additional federal dollars over. I don't know if I stole your
That's what I was going to say.
thunder.
I'm not aware of any beyond that. I probably also should have said when I was going over this, the recognition bonuses that you approved, those will be funded by you, either through a year-end transfer, if that's possible at the close of this fiscal year, or if not, it'll have to come from your fund balance as a budget adjustment from fund balance. That's how that turned out to be. 436,000, I think, is what the final figure was. That's how that'll be funded. But I'm not aware of any other federal grants.
So my next question, and this was something that I had heard some other areas do, advertising. And of course, you want to be careful what potential company would want to do it, but is there a way to have some type of advertising on the buses for different companies, a computer company or cleaning companies or, different various companies? I mean, of course, it's something that would have to be approved, it's something we have to look at, but that's also money that could potentially help in some way, shape, or form, new buses, any upkeeps, anything of that nature? That's something that I had
So
heard
that's,
about.
that's an interesting question. That would be technically governed by the Board of Ed's advertising policy. In past years, and it's been some years since I've brought it up, since it's come up, the board the board as a body hasn't been interested in pursuing those types of different advertising. Ed wants to speak.
And I reiterate what Mr. O'Neill says about the advertising policy. So we already have a policy that would govern things like advertising on athletic fields and things like that. But keep in mind that the buses don't belong to the Board of Education. And so any discussion of this new topic would also need to be agreed upon with the contractors, who to their credit and understandably, have reminded us from time to time, hey, these are our buses, not yours, when we want to add things that we believe are for the safety of students and the public. Because, every once in a while we want to put something on and that requires drilling into the bus and whatnot. And those concerns are well-founded. And we've negotiated with the contractors around those concerns, and we've reached mutual agreements. This would be another area where that would be required.
And Mr. Hardesty just whispered in my ear that MVA doesn't allow advertising on school buses, I guess, to and from school. Yeah.
Is that on the outside or both? Okay,
Okay.
well, there you go.
Interesting.
I just have an observation here. Can you offer a insurance package to drivers? Now, you don't own the buses, but those drivers are, I guess, through the independent contractor. But can you offer something that, I don't know if it'd be cheaper or not than, dollars per hour, but can you offer a health insurance or a partial program that may give some incentive for people to want to drive instead of just hourly wage?
I might defer to Mr. O'Mealy. So there's some legal history here that I'm probably not the best person to try to explain, but the IRS has at times been very interested in making sure there's a clear line between the drivers being the employees of a contractor and not being our employees, and things like that tend to not be recommended by legal to blur that line.
So to piggyback on that, just like they're not our buses, they're not our employees. Every driver is the employee of the contractor. And so, and I'm going back probably 18, 20 years when the IRS did an investigation of bus contracting in Maryland public schools. And in particular, they focused largely on the Eastern Shore. But everybody else in the state was very much aware of it, and they wanted to make sure that we weren't blurring that independent contractor relationship. So the more we treat the employees of the contractors as our employees, the more that line gets blurred. Now, that said, we could negotiate with the contractors so that an amount could be used for the specific purpose of the contractors providing insurance, but it wouldn't be through our insurance program. They would have to do that on their own, individually perhaps, or as a consortium coming up with their own plan. But I don't know that they would be interested in doing that. Keeping in mind that those drivers and assistants are employees of the contractors, we could not compel them to do that. No more than we could say, hey, give all of the drivers an increase. We could put money available for the purpose of doing that. But it is entirely up to the contractor how they spend that money. So,
And that's an interesting point too, right? Like, so the 3% minimum guaranteed salary, like, we can't say that that's how they have to spend it, right? But we
We-
can make money available to say, this money is supposedly earmarked, for this, but they don't have to spend it that way, right?
They do not. And now, it could be that we say, this money is conditioned upon you using it for a specific purpose, but that is a contractual arrangement between the Board of Education and the contractor.
Right.
But again, they're not our employees, and so we can't treat them as such.
And that's an area, if I may, where I would ask that we be careful. One of the things that's come out of the dialogue that's been going on for a year or so now, off and on, including the committee, is at least for me, I became very much aware that they are each individual and unique businesses with, to some degree, a unique and individual business model. And I think there was some historic confusion, at least that I stepped into. And so one of the things I've told them, which I certainly can backtrack on, but I told them rather clearly, was if your business model, and I think it varies by size, by how many employees they may have, makes better sense for you to have a wage schedule, then I want you to have a wage schedule. And I don't want to tell you how to do that to make it work. I just want you to pick kids up every day safely, drive them to school and take them home. And so,
Right.
I've spent a little bit of time with them saying things like, we break the formula down into components, but at the end of the day, we reimburse you the whole amount. And my main interest is in you continuing to provide excellent service however you do that. So I'm not saying you can't change that decision, but that's what I've been saying to them. So.
And I do know that we've got a contractor, if they show up every day for a month, they get an extra $1 an hour for all their time. So, they're trying. It's really tough. But I know that they need more than that.
So John, the difference between, so there's 2.2 million up here, and the top box has the 2 million. Is that adding the 171,000 from the reducing the fuel divisor below?
I think it's just the rest of
No.
the budget category that does.
Right, that's exactly right. That's the entire increase for, regardless of
Okay.
specific. This is what's going towards the items that came through the report. That
Okay.
difference is what we would have had to fund in a normal year.
Okay, so the 200 and some $1,000 difference, that's just the normal
would've been there.
increase in that
Correct.
particular budget center?
Correct.
Okay. So these items in the second box, though, the 171,000, is that already included in the items above?
No.
I
No.
can't really tell, because it says the fuel at 6.5 miles per gallon, but.
These are not. So
Those are not,
in
okay.
the report even, there was, I tried to, so we worked on the report together, and then we asked the representative contractors to make sure that they shared it with all of the contractors. They did many times and many versions as it came to an end. And then after they received the report of the committee, the contractors as a whole, those who were on the committee and those who weren't, said we'd like these 3 additional things too, as well, in addition to the report. And they're noted in the report, but they weren't something that we recommended to Dr. Lockhart or that he agreed to build into his budget, proposed budget. So these are 3 things that, for instance, they may still be emailing you, asking you to consider or do. We didn't, because they didn't really grow out of the work of the committee. Some of them, I'm not even sure and I can only speak for me, I'm not a whole committee, and I don't know that Dr. Lockhart and I've had much discussion on these things with specificity. Some of them, I'm not sure that I have data to support, like the fuel divisor. The way they proposed that was to cover increased costs for the diesel exhaust fuel additive. But we do have GPS data that sort of suggests what the correct divisor should be. And so I don't have data to support that. If you wanted to do it, it would be for a different reason. The second administrative allotment, the report agreed to graduate that over 5 years to I thought a decent increase. They're asking to double that. I don't disagree with them that the allotment as a whole may not cover for each of them, for any one of them, all of their operating costs, but I don't know that doubling it's the right answer. That's not something that's been studied. And I don't necessarily, as a single person, disagree with increasing pay with the theory that it would do something with the shortage, but I don't know what the right amount is, and this is a little bit, this is a different place than we've ever been before, where he's trying to build a budget to bring to you. We had this committee in the summer, the conversation is still ongoing. You have all kinds of budget priorities you haven't even had any time to discuss yet. And I've agreed to meet with them, but I don't really have any parameters to move the conversation forward or to close the conversation. This is sort of a weird moment right now with all of these things.
Well, I was a little confused with because the 3% minimum salary increase guarantee for drivers, that's in both places.
I was thinking of this, and John gave it to me ahead of time, I should have picked up on this, but the stuff at the top is in the budget. So correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but we put 3% in the budget. This 3% down here is anything above 3%. So if we wanted to go to 4.
Anything more than 3, okay.
We want to go to 4, it's $97,000.
That's correct.
Got it.
And I labeled them, it probably would be better to have labeled that increase over
Right.
3% minimum guarantee.
Okay, gotcha. And one of the things that, I mean, to your point of how we're trying to build a budget, like, I don't think that we can say, like, we had said that, okay, the 3% minimum salary increase, we were saying we needed to bring that to the table as part of the building the budget discussions. But I don't think that we can say that there's going to be a 3% minimum salary increase guarantee for every year. I mean, that's a discussion that has to be had every year, understanding the current economic situation and the current budget constraints, right? So for this year, we're talking about the 3% being in there, right? But I don't think that we're saying that we're guaranteeing forevermore that there will be a minimum 3% guarantee. Is that how the rest of you all understand it as well?
I think they're asking for that, and I think it's something we need to vote on and consider. Again, looking at Kerwin, looking at a lot of other things, like it or not, there's a lot of guarantees moving forward that I'm not sure how we're going to fund. And this, to me, this is just another brick on the pile. And then what I was going to ask, which kind of piggybacks onto that, and you saying this is getting complicated, they're also, and you did the bonuses, but they're also asking for other things to happen before next year's budget, possibly, right?
They have asked me that. My answer has been, other than the bonuses, I can't change this year's budget. I guess you could, but I can't do that. And I went back and reviewed everything I had sent and, setting up the work of the committee, and I felt, maybe obviously I could have been a little bit clearer, but at least in what I wrote, it was always about the FY23 budget, not about the current budget. And the committee, to be honest, was, I think, years in the making, and really should have occurred whether there was a pandemic and or a driver shortage or not. It probably needed to be done, and probably the committee's report reflected more the changes we had made over time relative to legislative audit reports than responding to a pandemic or responding to a shortage. But now all of those things are coming together in this one place and at this one time. And to answer your question, Mrs. Savini, I think, at least for me, I was thinking of the 3% guarantee as that would be the starting point where we come to the superintendent every year to build that category of the budget. But I think all of us recognize that even with collective bargaining to some extent, if you agree to a contract that later there's not funds for, you have to have an alternative process to address that. I think what they're saying now is a 3% starting point's not enough. It needs to be more now and more every year thereafter. But how much more is not a conversation that we've had, and as I'm suggesting, I'm not really sure how to have, because I don't know that I have parameters or what that amount would be if I did.
So now we know what the 2.2 million is that we're building in for the increased budget. Now we probably need to move on to all the other categories, understand how it all fits together, and then potentially circle back to other items, right? I mean,
I think that's a good suggestion at this point.
because there are other considerations that Chris has on the next, several slides, and then circling back to your point, Ms. Savigny, and having continued conversation allows us to kind of get the whole context.
Very good. Okay, well, we'll move on to the next slide. And so the item that we deal with every year is inflationary impacts on things that are kind of baked into our budget, things like utilities for the buildings. We have to heat, air condition, have lights on, so on for the buildings. We have to have insurances. When I say insurances, I mean for the board, general liability, fire, those types of things. And then there's the BOE, the Board of Ed's share of the employee benefits. It's a shared responsibility, so we have to look at that each year. We're very early in our process, so we don't have a complete number yet, but we're estimating preliminarily 2.5 million additional for those items. I did have some follow-up. I've had a couple questions about utilities. We are locked into on utilities. For electricity, we're locked in through next year, so that shouldn't be an issue. We're also locked in for natural gas, I believe, for at least part of next year. And then we have a multi-year deal on heating oil. It's a one-year deal with the ability to extend annually. So I think the biggest part of our utilities is electricity. So electricity is locked in through the entire budgeted year, the year in question. So we should be good on utilities. So that, I think, good question, and I went back and did a little homework to make sure that was the case.
So is most of this going to be then employee benefit shares?
That would be correct. That's the biggest item there is the employee benefit. And that's a big ticket item, so 2.5 million is, on a percentage basis, is not a very large percent because our health insurance is, shouldn't have even brought that up if I didn't know what the number was, but that wasn't smart.
Isn't it something like 70 million?
I think it's like 40 million is our share, and I think it's with the employee share, it's something like that. So, 4 million would be a 10% increase. So, I should have brought my book with me, my budget book. But yeah, my point is, it doesn't get lost. It's a big ticket item. So even small increases on a larger item are expensive. So that's something that we deal with every year.
What was, and you said you didn't know the percent, or it was very small?
I don't know the percent at this point. When we roll out the budget, the superintendents, I will have a slide on the specifics of insurance so you can see exactly what the increase is for that item.
Okay.
I'm sure I shouldn't have brought it up that way because I should have had my backup if I was going to bring it up. But it is a big number. 2.5 million is a big number, but this is a typical number, and it's on a percentage basis. It's not a large. We're not like looking at a 10% increase in health insurance. We're looking at something more manageable, but they tend, because it's a large base figure, it tends to add up pretty quickly.
Now, is that also part of what Kerwin is putting in place as well, as
No,
far as?
There's no, the Kerwin impact would be anything that's tied to a salary increase, like your Social Security, workers' comp, any of those benefits that are based upon the amount of salaries that you're paying, those go up. But we include that piece of it. We don't put in inflation because that would be considered salaries. Like when we give you a number on how much it costs to give someone a raise, we factor in the Social Security, the workers' comp. We put that in the raise. That's not a cost of doing business. These are costs of doing business. If we gave no one an increase and we didn't change anyone's coverage on health, there's going to be an increase just to give everybody the same thing they received in the prior year. That's what this item is. So Kerwin doesn't impact insurances at all, other than the number of employees we have. And if we add an employee, we also put a factor in for health insurance and those types of things. So that's all covered by Kerwin.
Okay.
So, sorry.
And I'd asked you before a couple of times probably about utilities, and
Right.
and I just think that CCPS deserves kudos for what they've done with utilities. You've done it for a number of years, and we are very fortunate to have very good rates on a lot of that stuff, and especially as volatile as everything is right now, to have it locked in.
Right.
Especially with the number of buildings and
Yes.
campuses that we have, that's.
Yeah, and that's, you know, I think that's a joint effort in our purchasing department, getting out there and understanding the market. It's also hats off to our, you know, the county and our facilities folks in upgrading our HVAC systems that are more energy efficient, and that's helped over time as well. So those are all important parts of our utilities going down. So there are a couple of other items on this slide that are new. The Title I, we talked about this over the summer. We had a plan to get us through the current fiscal year 22, and that's working well. But we are concerned that this is going to be an ongoing problem in FY '23. And that's basically multiple kind of drivers here, but we think it's the number of free and reduced students tied to the census that happens every 10 years. We went under a certain threshold that caused our federal dollars for Title I to go down, and we're concerned that this is going to be an ongoing problem. The services that we provide, we want to continue to provide, and in order to do that, we're still kind of going through the analysis of exactly what we're going to need, but we're looking at up to $1 million for that. So it's not an emergency at this point because we've gotten through the current year. That was kind of what we were dealing with over the summer. Now we're kind of into what do we want to do, because the only other real option here is to reduce services. eSmart grant is a similar item. This is a county grant. It's a grant that the county receives that is going away. And its services are provided for students in that grant that we believe are important to us. So in order to continue, these would go away if we did not pick these dollars up. So that's what that is. And we have folks here that can get into more detail on that if you have follow-up questions.
Yeah, I was
and then-
gonna,
go
I
ahead.
was gonna ask exactly what type of services.
Sure, we have,
If I
folks
can
here.
have just a moment here, I have to leave. I have another engagement here in a couple of minutes across the street. And this week is the MACO Conference, Maryland Association of Counties. All commissioners will be in Cambridge for your Wednesday meeting. My apologies, but our schedules sometimes just don't match up between the Board of Ed and the commissioners. But I'll take this back with me, and I need to see some of this presently. And I hope at our quarterly meetings, you can have an abbreviated version of this presented so everybody has a same understanding of what's going to be needed in the budget. And with Kerwin, none of us know at the present time. I understand that. We've been trying to find answers out ourselves, and there isn't any at this time. So this makes it more important that we all work together to get through this budget season. So, thank you.
Commissioner Weaver, if you get good answers down at Mako, bring them back to us.
If I don't, don't bring them back. Excuse me.
Nick, do you want to go ahead and speak a little bit to the eSmart grant?
And Ms. McCaul's and I kind of team this because it impacts both of our departments. But the eSmart grant primarily covers our PAT educators, and those are folks that work out in the community with families in homes, doing lots of coaching, helping families get connected, and they do a lot with direct supports, and it's a tremendous benefit for me in special education because it gets us a head start on identifying kids and families that may need services and supports. But they support students with and without disabilities as well.
Yeah, they provide early interventions to our families in the community.
63 families as of count last week are currently receiving services. So that's a pretty big group for 3 hourly staff members to support.
And that's really important, especially to making sure we start identifying needs earlier to get them the services they
Yes.
need. And that's an incredible loss that we're going to be losing that we need to pick up.
Yeah, it's very beneficial.
And did you say 3 employees as a part of
Yes,
this?
3
Okay.
hourly employees.
Okay.
so this is another one where we had a problem in the current year, but we were able to, with work with the county, and we were able to kind of get through the current year, but now we're looking at the long-term solution. So we have some, everything's okay today. We just have to have our decision whether we're going to continue with this long-term or whether we're going to make some tough decisions. And then last on the preliminary expenditure list is operating impacts for the Career and Tech Center. We're adding square footage, so we need to add 2 custodians over there. So that's part of the improved building.
Okay, and before you go on, I have a couple of questions. Let me back up to Title I first of all. Are the same number of schools going to be identified and full
This would-
services
yeah, thi-
provided? And
This would keep things at the same level as they currently are.
and it's interesting because it's based on the number of free reduced price meals, right?
It's, yeah, we're kind of, the exact reason was very difficult to kind of understand the specific reasons why we lost, but we know it has to do with our free and reduced number of meals that we serve and this last census. And one of the things that's going on right now is we're feeding all of our students through the state for free.
I know, but
So
we're still collecting the data with who would qualify, right?
Well, we do, but there is that incentive of filling out the paperwork that you typically have. Like in a normal year, when we don't give free and reduced to everyone, you have to fill out your application in order to get free and reduced. If you're getting free and reduced without filling out a paperwork, you don't fill out paperwork. So that's a part of the challenge. we
Yeah,
think.
that's a really important point. Everybody, regardless of income, is eligible for a free meal, breakfast and lunch at school, not even reduced, just free. And so there used to be, as Chris said, a lot more impetus for, if I qualify, I'm going to fill out the form, so I get it. And so that has been a challenge, and this is like maybe a small, like, good problem, bad problem, because our poverty rate is shrinking, whether it's a result of that or just changes in the poverty rate altogether. But then once we get below a certain threshold, we lose funding.
Right.
We have 3 Title I schools. They do a great job with the resources that are provided through Title I, and we don't want to see those resources go away. There's supports there because we still have challenges and issues and supports that are needed. So that's why we're looking at this, because we don't want to take the chance that, it'll just correct itself, and then it doesn't, and then we're short. So we're trying to identify all these things ahead of time, so we're knowledgeable about them, transparent about it,
Yeah.
so it's not a surprise for
And
us.
that threshold that Dr. Lockard's referring to is Carroll County went under 5%. I think we're sitting at about 4.9% now. So the county itself is seen to be a bit wealthier than historically it has been through the census. The second piece what Dr. Lockard's referencing is making sure that we get an accurate count of students that are living in some sort of situation where they would be benefiting from a free or reduced meal cost for their lunches. So there's lots going on there. We still have the 3 schools that we're targeting on, but when we're looking at that $1 million, one of the biggest impacts that we're trying to avoid is the staffing, as Chris said earlier. There are full-time psychologists in these buildings, and we know our ratios are low there across the school system. We have resource teachers that are in there that are providing academic support and coaching to teachers as well. So the needs in those buildings have not changed. In fact, just because certain areas of our county may be experiencing more wealth, there's certain areas of our county that have not changed. So we don't want that to be, we don't want the impact of others to affect the ones that need it the most.
But unfortunately, it is impacting everything. That's
So-
the unfortunate part. It is
Yeah.
impacting it because it's not balancing out. It's you still have those that are underserved and they're in that situation. But as the county grows and you have those more wealthy moving in, it's not fixing it. It's making things worse. So we lose funding for the services we need for the students that are underserved. And it's
Right.
not helpful.
Mr. O'Neill's illustrated that several times when you look at different types of formulas. Carroll County is always on the short end there when it comes to getting money because of our population. But we are sitting at 20% or 22% free and reduced meals now. That hasn't changed. In fact, that's grown in the last 2 years.
Okay,
And on this, I think none of us here, if the poverty level went from 5 to 4.9%, we don't want to give up our 3 Title I schools. Is the $1 million a safe figure? Is there, can it balloon, or is that pretty safe that that's the cost?
It should be that at the top end. Because we have built in we have looked for some efficiencies through this last year. So we put that in, hopefully is a worst-case scenario.
okay, and I just had one other question before we leave the page, and it's the bottom, concerning the bottom item.
Sure.
The additional custodial positions. And I guess my question is, are all of the other schools staffed equitably as far as having the number of custodians needed per square footage of the buildings?
We do have a formula, and they are funded per, or staffed per a formula, and the formula is driving this.
So all of the schools have the full custodial staffs that they need?
After reduction, I think Mr. Prokop would probably say, we're staffed equally, but we're probably not staffed as highly as we'd like across the board. But the staffing that we have, we've spread it out based upon a square footage formula.
One of the prior budget cuts during sort of that decade of reductions, I think it was maybe fiscal year 14, but I could be off by now. One of the cuts was we cut 29 custodial FTE, and obviously that changed the person to square foot amount after that. And there are no guarantees, as we know, but we tried to commit as much as we could to then say, well, let's at least stay at that person to square foot that leaves. So technically they're there, Dr. Dorsey. I think if you talk to school, they would say it's not beautiful because some of those FTE are split, shared, that sort of thing that kind of rubs the schools. It makes it a little bit harder to operate in those kinds of situations. But at least on a chart, we're trying to maintain that ratio. The additional square footage in the addition at Career and Tech would throw that off there if we don't add the two.
I see. Okay, and I guess I was thinking too about the schools with the portable facilities.
That's all factored into their square footage.
Yeah.
How are we with floaters? Is that tough too?
Yeah.
Like you say, none of
It
the
is.
schools are happy with the number they have right now, although it's equitable.
Right.
We've never, I believe, I'm not aware of a time in history where you would ever said we had enough floaters to serve the need. I think after the last reduction, we're down to 9. I think what's left is, so there's 9 floater custodians that plant operations can assign out on a given day to cover vacancies in 40 buildings. So it helps.
Yeah.
It's not great. It used to be a higher number than that.
All right, so we'll go to the next slide, and a couple of other items here, well, actually one that we have a dollar amount on, and that's one of the blueprint mandates that we do know of, that have the specifics on, and that's a national board, an additional $10,000 per teacher that has a national board certification. Now, we already, those who have a national board certification, I believe they already get a $5,000 amount, so we're talking about an additional $5,000 for those staff. Any staff who get it, who don't currently have it, their salary would go up by $10,000. So this is one of the items that is mandated by the blueprint. We estimate that the additional cost over and above what we're already putting into national board certification is $900,000. We are getting dollars within the formula. We don't have the specific amount yet, but we should also be getting dollars in the formula, in that 6.6 million. Some of that is directed towards this. So the state would say, we gave you dollars for that in particular. But the way we look at it is that 6.6 is no longer 6.6 for us to do whatever we want. It's kind of, we have a specific thing that we have to use the dollars for.
Right. That's why I think it's, as Commissioner Weaver pointed out, that's an important conversation to have with our Board of County Commissioners when we have a joint meeting, so that there's that common understanding that just because it looks like a good number we're getting from the state doesn't mean that's all in play for whatever we decide. There are mandates that we must, respond to.
And that's a great segue to the next bullet, which is other blueprint requirements. So we talked about what we know. Well, we know one thing, and then we have another bullet that could probably ends up being a lot of bullets that we don't know about yet. So that's kind of the challenge we have. Hopefully, we have additional revenue from the state over and above the 6.6, and these requirements are not as bad as they could be. So it looks like you have a question.
Mr. Hartlove, and I apologize, I came in a few minutes late, so you may have answered this right out of the gate before I got here, but the 6.6 million, weren't we originally anticipating that number to be a lot bigger?
We talked about that a little bit. Not really in detail, but I said, my analogy was the glass half full. If we look at what we had seen on some of the preliminary schedules, this is significantly less than what some of those items were. We'd seen 14, 15, maybe even 18 plus $1 million. So this is less than that, obviously. So that would be, in that way, it's not what we were hoping it would be.
Okay,
But
and
again,
is
that
there a
number-
rationale for that? Because I know, like, some of the other jurisdictions, I mean, they're getting massive amounts of increases, and
Do you want me to keep going?
6.6 million.
I think you're much better at this
Curious
than
to
I
see how you answer that.
am. No, I'm not good at this. Go ahead.
And I apologize, if you already had that discussion, I'll
No,
follow
it
up
was-
with
Didn't
you
have it to
after.
this depth.
We
and
had
I
it to the level of what I just said, glass half full or glass half.
And I know
That's
John's
all I said.
been asking these same questions.
So for full disclosure, going all the way back to the Kerwin Commission itself, and then the bill in 2020 that the governor vetoed, which was then enacted by veto override, and then the revision bill in the last session, each of those processes had a fiscal note attached to it. And on that fiscal note for state aid, changes in state aid listed by fiscal year, our number was much more appealing. It was
I think it was 16,
maybe
wasn't it?
16, and then it became
Yeah,
18.4, 18.4 in the final post-session version. And that was the only thing we had seen. So in full disclosure, Dr. Lockard used to meet with me, and he would say, "Are you sure?" And I
Right.
would say, "Yes, Steve." So then more recently, DLS released, and to my knowledge, never presented, and that doesn't mean they didn't. I'm not aware of a time where they presented these charts, but they created new charts that I had never seen before, that had never been part of a fiscal note, or et cetera, that had, for every fiscal year, but for 23, kind of the blueprint by program area. And that number is what we used to come up with the 6.6 million. So we took the final number there, compared it to what DLS says we're getting in 22, and that's 6.6 million. But there is no explanation yet received for what's the difference here? What does this one chart that's existed every time versus this new by program chart you've put out that seems to be much more precise? My best guess, and that's all that this is, and I've been asking this question at the state level to the point that people have stopped responding to me or even acknowledging that I've sent it again. My best guess is that the chart you're thinking of that had been there the whole time is sort of, if you could find what it means, what the underlying methodology is, it probably references sort of a set point in time, maybe before the blueprint phase in, maybe fiscal 20 or 21, and it compares money received under the state formula then versus now. And if all of this is accurate, Mrs. Savigny, then that would mean that funds we already receive in a certain way, but maybe they're restricted, but they don't come to us under the current state formula, are now going to come to us under the state formula. starting in fiscal year '23. So formula to formula, it's $18.4 million. But money in hand to spend, even if it was restricted in some way, it's not $18.4 million. It's most likely the $6.6 million. It probably also means that some of the early phase-in money we receive, pre-K, TSI, that's counted there too, even though that's already in hand. That's my best guess. I haven't been able to find an answer to that
That's what
question yet.
we think. In other words, the state's saying, we already gave you money in our foundation formula for these things. And in addition to what we'd give you next year, that's what would equal that larger number that we first saw, which is a little bit, I don't know what the right adjective is, but
There's no way that what they already gave us through pre-K and other things equals $12 million.
Well, that's a good point. They're also here's an item that we think could be part of the problem. Non-public placements, for instance. They've always given us approximately $3 million for non-public placements. That now has been incorporated into the formula. So they're saying this is now in the blueprint formula. It wasn't in the prior formula. Yeah, it's used car salesy type of thing. Is that what you wanted to say, Steve?
something like that. Yeah.
Maybe not quite.
So we wait for the governor to release his budget the first 10 days of session, as he has to do, to see, okay, and like Chris said, I want to be wrong, and I've told other people in this room who I've had this conversation with, I desperately want somebody to email me back or call me from some state place and say, you couldn't be more wrong. It is $18.4 million. You're an idiot. And I will thank them.
Right.
and we'll have a new PowerPoint at that point. But it's the most specific thing we've seen, which is probably a month and a half ago now that they released those charts, adds up to $6.6 million.
And
Okay.
that's why earlier on, we were trying to think about some of the previous budget priorities, some of the needs in our schools as it relates to resources. You'll see tonight, we're hesitant to go down those conversations and those, looking back at those pieces at this point, because we just have so much unknown that we want to make sure we can apply the funds that we're going to receive to what we're required to do and still be able to have room for negotiations.
Right, because these are massive amounts of increases that we're going to be needing to provide. There's no way that 6.6 million is going to cover that. I guess, is there an easy way to do this? So the reconciliation that you did between the 18.4 and the 6.6 for Carroll County, is there a way to do a quick reconciliation for, say, a Baltimore City or something to see if it's the same understanding of how the funds are being distributed? Because it wasn't Baltimore City was going to get hundreds of millions of dollars from the new
Yeah.
formula versus.
So they produced the charts for every jurisdiction, not just us. I guess I'd answer that by saying I did do that in some cases, and I don't want to name someone, but I did reach out to a couple of my counterparts in local systems and just said, hey, here's what this is. Were you expecting this number or this number? And what are you planning your budget around? And I haven't gotten too much of a response there either. And that could be a lot of things. But one of the things it could be is if I was expecting 18.4 and I'm getting 6, I'm really angry. If I was expecting 300 million and I'm getting 200 million, I might be a little miffed, but I'd rather John be quiet and not highlight this conversation at a statewide level, because 200 million is still 200 million.
Exactly.
But
I mean, the difference
honestly
between
don't know the
18 million and 6 million is huge when you're dealing with the type of dollar requirements that they're talking about. But, if you're getting 200 million additional, it's like you can make that work. Right?
Well, and the only thing I can say that's, it's all, hopeful is that the 6.6 is also a very preliminary number. So, we can, I don't like to use the word hope, but we can.
I hope that's our best, worst
Yes, that this
prediction.
is, that we're also wrong on this number,
Also-
and it's higher.
Making sure at minimum, the county in our 5-year plan at minimum holds true to the
Right.
the revenue increase that we've worked so hard on over the last few years to work with them on.
Right, so getting back to the, oh, I'm sorry, did I,
You-
I'm sorry.
I had a
I'm
question.
sorry.
Are we permitted to disclose what Kerwin's expectation is for starting salaries for teachers and the expectation of increases?
Sure.
Can,
Right, so that's
if somebody wants to,
top-notch. And we're going to be going over these a little more in detail at our Wednesday night board meeting. It's an agenda item, but for this
but if you
for
can
this
go ahead and
conversation.
disclose that.
Correct, yeah. So we'll do this again later in the week. So there's several requirements. One are the add-ons, and one of which Mr. Hartlove has on the screen. Another was that, and I do not have my blueprint binder in front of me, so I'm trying to do this from memory, but Ed can correct me, steer me straight. Another requirement is that the value of the teacher's salary scale has to increase by 10% over a given period of years, and what that period of years means for us is that there are 2 fiscal years left to meet that requirement of a 10% increase in value of the teacher's salary scale. Another is that by fiscal 27, July 1st, 2026,
Yep.
I believe, the minimum salary for
60.
a teacher anywhere in Maryland would be $60,000.
We're at about 48.5.
48.4, 48.5, yeah,
Yeah.
that's where we are, yep.
And those are, at least when you try to pick apart the blueprint as you're doing at your monthly meetings, and lots of folks here are doing, those are at least sort of easy to, that you can do that math. Then there are other requirements, and some of these are later and phased in, but a biggest one would be the impact on staffing, that the blueprint requirements for the percentage of time that teachers are involved in direct instruction. What does that mean? So the blueprint sets a limit, and there's reasons for this, and I'm not trying to disparage that, but just to be quick, the blueprint sets a limit on what percentage of a teacher's hours they would be teaching students. So the only way to accomplish that requirement that I know of is to have adequate staffing to meet that threshold. And so that phases in, I believe, starting in fiscal 25 for 8 years. And Ernesto Diaz and his folks and Chris are working on an analysis for us to try to get to you as to what our best estimate, and it'll revise, but what our best estimate would be right now, because even if it doesn't technically start until 25 and phase in for 8 years, if that number is big,
We've
and
gotta build,
6.6
right.
is the more correct number, we might not be able to recommend to you that you wait until then. Maybe you need to kind of get ahead of that. And I'll just do one more, and then I'll stop, Steve, I promise. But like another policy area that kind of concerns me the most, and it kind of goes to the Title I conversation you were having earlier, is the policy area that Mr. Shockney oversees for us, more resources to ensure more or all students succeed. If you look at what that's about, it's largely about student services, wraparound student services, and I'm doing a disservice to it, but it sort of falls into the community schools concept and funding based on concentration of poverty. We're not going to be a county that's going to be eligible for any of that funding, in my opinion, ever, or at least in my career. But I don't know that when we submit our plan to the state that they're going to say, oh, okay, Carroll County, you don't have to have any of those things in your plan then,
Right.
because there's no money flowing your way through the community schools grant or the concentration of poverty. My guess is they're going to say you still need to do those things. And then that's going to show up in terms of different ways, but a lot of staffing in terms of student health and mental health and behavior support and that kind of thing.
And I just wanted to make sure we pointed it out too, because, it's not a lack of trying to make sure our teachers are getting the proper salaries. It's the unknowns right now. We want to make sure it's done fairly. We don't want to cut someone short. We don't want to, not do the right thing, but we also want to make sure we're following what's going to be happening. It's going to be taken care of right. We're following the correct protocols for it. So, and that's the thing. I just want to make sure we're not cutting anybody short on anything. We're trying to make sure we follow this in line.
And the thing I want to bring up is all 24 counties are going to be fighting for these teachers, and there are not going to be enough educators to fill all those positions, because they are only going to, I think, 60% in the classroom? something like that.
For the-
And the
yeah.
other 40, they're in professional development. And
And-
we can't get enough now.
And
So-
my guess is to take that one step further, while folks are fighting for shortages, you're going to see some counties go, well, we'll make our minimum 61 or
Uh-huh.
62
Right.
to draw away from,
Yeah.
from other counties who put it at
Yes,
62.
there will be games played, but you're not going to find enough educators in the state to fill all these jobs. And I'm just, and also then the administrators have to be in the classroom also. So it's going to be a real challenge for everyone, not only money, but personnel.
It
And-
will be a
and the
challenge,
And the
and
buildings and rooms to house
Right,
these people are
yes.
gonna be a challenge. And I don't know that Kerwin money reflects that.
well, I was just going to add, there are challenges, but there are also, what, Mr. O'Mealy, non-negotiables, right?
Yes.
There are non-negotiables, and there are a lot of areas that Kerwin doesn't specify that will be subject to negotiation. And keep in mind also, it is highly likely that by FY '25, we will be dealing with dual scales. Because we will have those employees who are on the career ladder, particularly those who start after July 1, 2024, while we have others who will remain on the existing step and lane schedule. How many teachers migrate from the one to the other? It's hard to say. We can be sure that the National Board Certified teachers will. We can be sure that our teachers who start July 1, 2024 and afterwards, and that will include all those teachers beginning not later than 2026 with a starting salary of at least 60,000 will be on the career ladder. But there, as we've said, there are floors but no ceilings.
Mrs. Savigny.
Be very
So-
interesting.
John, you had said, there are a lot of things that, okay, we're not really going to have, that we're going to be required to do by the state, but there's not really money flowing our way from the state to cover those items. I'm hoping that we're planning to keep a running list of those things and the dollar amounts associated with them, so at least when we determine at the end of this, if it's going to cost us, $20 million to do all of these state mandates, but we're only getting 6.6 million, then they haven't met their commitment of providing the funds necessary, that it didn't have to come from the counties itself. Like, I want to make sure that we have a running total and some ammunition on that front to say, look, we need more of those blueprint dollars because you made this commitment in the beginning and you're now not living up to it.
I think the answer is it'll be collected in a neat and tidy place called the CCPS Comprehensive Implementation Plan. So on Wednesday evening, the report for the blueprint is going to be on timelines. But the overarching timeline is that the Accountability Implementation Board is supposed to submit to, at the state level, a model plan or guidelines for local plans by February. Now, these dates are also a little bit in question because everything's been moving slow. But those guidelines are received by MSDE and then turned back to the locals in April, so that by the end of the fiscal year, every local school system in Maryland, every local Board of Ed in Maryland would submit its own individual implementation plan. And so what I'm suggesting is that, I'm also not suggesting that that would be what we recommend, but I wonder if Carroll County Public Schools submitted a plan that said, hey, in policy area 4, not applicable. No concentration of poverty funding for us, no community school grant for us, so nothing here for us. They're probably not going to be okay with that. They're going to say, well, these are still important things that need to be done. Yes, you don't qualify for those streams of funding, but give this back to us with your strategies and your, so those things would be there. They'd be in that plan. They'd be in the operating budget. So it would be easy to quantify what is that costing you locally to make those things happen.
Okay, we're really getting close to the end here. We've got a few more slides. The big thing on this slide that we didn't cover is employee salaries and negotiations. That right now is not, is something is a to be determined. So we have to go through the process. And that's obviously, it's typically a multi-million-dollar item. So that is all the new information. The rest of this is summary. So as we've talked about on the first couple of slides, we're estimating right now, we hope it's conservative, but we have $13 million in new revenue. Hopefully it's more than that. And then to kind of summarize where we are on expenditures that we know about at this point, we talked about inflationary impacts, bus contractors, Title I, so on. Those add up to 6.9 million. So there's nothing new on there, it's just kind of putting it all on one slide. Then if you go to the next slide, that's the balance. So we have $13 million in new revenue coming in. We have preliminary incomplete at this point, estimated expenditures increase of 6.9 million. That leaves 6.1 million on the bottom line, and if everything was taken care of, that would be great. But we have a couple of big ticket items, employee salary negotiations is not factored in there as far as a specific dollar amount. The other blueprint requirements, we don't know what they're going to cost, what they're going to be, and what they're going to cost. And then we also had the discussion earlier about additional bus contractor requests. And none of those items are in this budget. So, and then just some kind of benchmark figures for staff to give all eligible staff, and what I mean by eligible is not everybody gets a step, because if you're at the top of the scale, you don't get a step. So all eligible employees to get a step is 5.2 million. COLA, each 1% in COLA for our contracted employees is 2.2 million. So even if you put those together, you don't have quite enough to cover that, if that were the only thing in there.
That's what I was going to say, back to Ms. Savigny's. If you're worried you missed anything, he just hit it hard here, because to me, that's the thing. Right now, union rep, we don't have enough money to give a step plus 1%. And that's a sad way to start a budget.
Right, and again, kind of the theme of this is there's more that we don't know than we know, so, we don't want to go too far with that, but it's the beginning of the conversation, and the beginning of the conversation is not that we moved Christmas up a few weeks in the
You and Mr. Neal, you two just need to promise, all the unknowns will be positives.
Right.
Should be no problem.
No negative Nancy.
Yeah.
Yes. So those are the benchmarks. And then just wanted to throw the fund balance in there. There's always a kind of the curiosity as to where we stand on fund balance. We're very healthy. We're right where we want to be on fund balance. Between the 1% floor and the 5% ceiling, we're at 4.33%. We do have some ongoing items. We have some positions that are currently being funded out of this. So we do have some commitments already in this budget that will be going forward, at least for another year in the budget.
Okay, that was going to be one of my follow-up questions, was I know that we had some positions that we were funding out of fund balance, but that's not that doesn't run out as part of this budget, it's one more year down the road?
Yes.
Where we have to evaluate whether we have the funds to continue those positions past that 3-year point.
And that's approximately, it's a little over $800,000 in positions that we have in there now. So those positions you'll see the detail, but they will be in the superintendent's first, version of the budget. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, before you get to the next step piece, maybe this is a place to circle back around to the beginning conversation as it related to some of the bus contracting conversation. I think it's important for everybody to see the bigger picture of what we're talking about operating budget-wise, and some of the, some of the constraints, some of the demands, some of the challenges that we face there. So I didn't know if the board wanted to revisit the previous conversation at this point.
Well, Dr. Lockhart, is there anything else that we're missing from a priorities standpoint? I mean, the real big ones are, so you've got them kind of laid out on because really what the input that we're supposed to give you guys at this preliminary work session is what are our top priorities of things that we're trying to figure out how to fund, right?
Right, and that's I think these are the three items that, there's not a lot of detail there, but the second one is kind of it's a big unknown right now. And the third one is one that you could discuss. I think you have the dollar amounts but you don't know what the other, what you don't know now is what the final revenue numbers are gonna be.
Yeah, that makes it.
And what all the expenditures are gonna be, which will inform some of those other decisions you have to make, so.
So the items adding up to the 6.9 million of knowns,
Right.
we're saying that those are the top priorities for the school system, outside of everything else that we need for the blueprint and potential additional for bus contractors.
I'm thinking so, and many of these items are things that are really, they're just things that we want to continue. The Title I, the National Board Certified Teachers is a mandate. The eSmart is something we want to continue. It's not an enhancement. The custodians, you can say it's the same thing. We just want to maintain a formula. The bus contractors is the only really decision point that you've made in here. Well, you haven't made it yet, but I mean, that's the only kind of thing that we have a decision to make about. So that's kind of where we are. And then we have unknowns of revenue and unknowns of additional mandatory expenses.
Right, and, you know, in the past, as we've done town halls and we've had feedback for budgets, we've talked about the importance of compensation for our employees. We've talked about resources for our schools, and right before the pandemic, we added positions to schools through special education. For the first time in 10 years, we added position to support our schools, and that was great, and then that stopped. And so we have a queue of supports for our schools that we'd love to be able to implement. However, we're restricted right now by the fact that we have a lot of mandates in front of us, and we want to be able to meet the letter of the law and also always consider the compensation of our employees as a high priority. And so that therein are the challenges of our typical budget cycle. It seems a little more sort of unknown this year with the blueprint legislation as it relates to the state dollars.
And I think a lot of the unknown too is what COVID has done to our students and our staff, between the stresses, the anxieties, loss of learnings, not identifying needs that students may need in a year or two. And those things could be costly as well. And
Well, just to kind of, to piggyback on that, the one thing that, this is your unrestricted budget. The restricted budget, those federal dollars that we talked about earlier, there's one more, we have a plan in place for an additional year for those interventions. So the summer school, those types of things outside of this budget will continue next year. So
the COVID money's not going to last forever.
that's right. But at least for the budget we're talking about right now,
Yeah.
we don't have to consider if you thought, okay, we would like to do something in the summer. That's covered.
And to your point, Ms. Pataglia, those are one-time applications, or maybe two-year
Right,
applications
right.
of those funds. What you're talking about are the kinds of resources that we can put in schools to support students for multiple years, students and teachers
Right.
for multiple years. As
But
a
making
result
sure
of-
we have funding for it,
Right.
that's going to be the key.
That's the challenge. That's why we used some fund balance a couple of years ago when we said, okay, we know we're going to have these needs. And we said, okay, it's worth us to go ahead and do that. We'll reevaluate it in another year, as Ms. Savigny said, because we couldn't wait for some of those things.
Yeah.
So.
And you kind of answered my question before I asked it, but I think not quite. The way I'm looking at it, the 6.9 is almost the stuff we don't have a lot of choice about. The priorities are the unknowns,
Yeah.
which is kind of what you said. We care about our employees and we got to treat them right. And the blueprint requirements, we can't help.
Right.
And maybe the additional bus contract requests, we've been blessed with buses and bus drivers and compared to other counties, but we can't take that for granted either. So the priorities kind of are the unknowns, not the 6.9, in my opinion. You kind of said that, I think.
Yep.
And Mr. O'Neill, please try to get with those bus contractors so that we can, because that is a big unknown about dollar amounts. And with all the pressure around the other counties, I don't want to wake up one morning and say, Carroll County Public Schools, try to get your kid to school. That would be a real slap in the face. So please see if we can we've got to work something out. The wheels on the bus have got to go, or we're going to have empty schools. So it's a no-win situation, and it is definitely unknown. So we have got to get to a point where we know. We have to.
Thanks. As you do this slide, I'm curious, the joint meeting is very early in this. So as you go through the next steps, I'd like to also see what hope do we have of much additional information by, what is it, January 6th?
Okay, so good segue into the last slide here. We have our work session today. The next big step in the process is the superintendent's budget is rolled out. That budget's basically going to be what we saw here. We're going to go with unless we hear something significantly different from the board, we're going to go forward with the additional 6.6 in state and the 6.4 in county. We'll put those items that we know of in that budget. We'll have better numbers on inflationary impacts, which I talked about earlier. I should be able to get you the detail on those. So you'll have some of the things it'll be more complete and more detailed view of this, but this will be kind of the flavor of what it is. Then what we're really looking at is that joint meeting with the commissioners to kind of give them a flavor of where we stand. And then the big item that's coming up is the governor's budget release. And to me, the biggest part of that is going to be, are we getting 6.6, 6.7, 18.4, 10?
Right.
That is the big thing we'd like to know.
And to your point, Mr. Collier, that might be a place where we circle back around with the commissioners.
Yes.
To talk about, okay, here are the knowns now, and here are the competing priorities we have, and how can the county support some of those
At
priorities?
January 6th, we're not going to know a lot more.
No.
And I empathize for you.
Yeah.
By mid-January, you got to have a budget together with probably no more answers.
Right. That's right.
Right.
So
Right.
it'll be iterative in process. We'll probably keep
Yeah.
coming back around to it as information gets added.
I think we definitely asked the commissioners for 50%. I mean, they always say that, Carroll County Public Schools gets half of the county budget. Let's see half of the county budget, 50%. Unless that's a different form of math I haven't heard of just yet. 47 isn't 50.
And I think when you talk about the revenue from the commissioners, it's hard to even know what you would request if you don't know what all the requirements are and all the revenue you're going to get from the county. So that makes it very difficult to even say, well, if they said, what are your needs? We would at this point, we'd have to say, we think we're going to have some significant needs, but we don't know specifically all of them yet. So we need to so that governor's budget will be telling on the revenue side. And also, as John had mentioned earlier, they give us dollars in specific buckets. So just the fact that they give us dollars in a bucket tells us that that's where they want those dollars to go. And there should then also be corresponding requirements probably in those areas. So that'll be, it won't give us all the information we need, but it'll give us quite a bit to discuss through February. So then your budget that you adopt in late February can be more informed. It's not going to be, more than likely not going to be everything we know, but it's going to be much more informed than the January version. So you guys both have your.
I'm sorry, I'm just playing.
I'm not used to doing this.
I know.
Last year, I said we needed our 5 million back, and we got 1 million back.
1 million back, yeah.
And the number is 4 million. I didn't forget that, and I'm sure you all didn't either.
Well, that's where I was going to go next.
There you go, I gave you a segue.
Thank you for that. So the $6.4 million county revenue increase, is that the 3.1%?
Yes. Yes, that's from the plan.
That's equal to the 3.1%?
Yes, that is the
Okay.
3.1. I'm sorry, I was going to go to that slide, but.
Okay, because we had asked for the 5 million of ongoing, and what we got was 1 million of ongoing.
And I know I specifically asked, we all asked for that.
Right. for them to get us back to
Where
where we were supposed to be pre-pandemic. So we're short 4
Yes, we are.
from last year. So I think, so when does the request need to go to the commissioners?
Your February, if you're going to request additional dollars, your February budget would be the place where where you would do that. And you should have additional information to base that request on by then.
Okay.
So that's that's kind of, we'll have a hearing, you'll get some feedback from the public, you'll have additional information from the governor's budget, you'll obviously have discussions. Well, I think we have a work session in there before then, and then you can decide what you want to request.
I didn't forget that 4 million.
Okay. Yeah, and to Ms. Battaglia's point, like the 50% versus the 47%, I'd like to kind of see that trend mapped out again of what the percentage was going to education, because if we can show that last year it was a decrease, that gives us additional ammunition to say, look, we got behind, right, because of the way dollars were allocated last year, and with Kerwin and everything else coming out, that we need to talk about this. So I think it just needs to be an item of debate with the commissioners, that additional 4 million that we didn't get last year.
And there has been county growth too. I mean, you can drive down the road and obviously see it with the new neighborhoods going in. So there has been county growth.
Right. So, I mean, I think it's not a difficult argument to make that, so, okay, yeah, we'll do the 6.4, which is the 3.1 that you guys had committed to, but we also want to talk about the 4 million that we didn't get last year, and whether there's any way to get some piece of that back, especially as that percentage going to education kind of decreases over time.
And for the last 2 years, we've lost ongoing money,
Right.
not just one-time money.
Right, not
It's
one-time
worse.
money, we've lost ongoing money, right.
We can definitely get you the trend, the percentage trend over a number of years.
Okay.
Yeah. No, it's even like you guys had said, we lost Title I funding because of the census. So clearly, the county is getting an increase in revenue if this is what is occurring. So, yeah, we need to ask for that nice 50 plus whatever they didn't fund us from begin with.
So, I mean, I don't want to come at it from a negative point of view, right? Because, I mean, they worked with us last year. We did
We
get.
worked with them.
And we worked with them, exactly. So it just needs to be the joint discussion had from a positive perspective of how do we, like, man, there's a lot of mandates and requirements coming down on all of us. How do we manage it from every angle? So,
Well, I think that's all we have for today. So unless you have questions.
Thank you, Chris. You did a fantastic job as always.
Well, it's a team effort.
Yes, absolutely. And everybody,
effort,
John,
these-
that we,
Yes, everyone.
and all that. Yep.
Yep.
So thank you, Dr. Lockard.
You're welcome.
Oh,
Anything else for the good of the order?
I guess we'll
Thank
see
you all.
everybody on Wednesday.
Where are your ugly sweaters? We need to be a little festive. Let's get some,
I still
Winter
have that bandana
holiday.
thing with the lights that
Oh,
you
yes,
gave us
last
last
year.
year.
there we go. Be a little festive.
Thanks, everybody.